In France, right in the heart of Paris, an elderly man was laying out his prayer mat in Place de la République when someone pushed through the crowd, kicked the fabric on the ground and shouted, "Not here! Go pray somewhere else!" The old man didn't answer. He simply bowed his head again while tourists raised their phones to record the scene. At that exact moment, the sky, which minutes before had been completely blue, darkened as if the morning had been forcibly interrupted. What could change the weather so quickly in broad daylight? And why did it happen right after that attack? What came next made Paris wonder whether it had witnessed a mere coincidence or something far greater. Before continuing, make sure you're already subscribed and tell in the comments which city you're watching from. Belleville was the refuge of Youssef Ben Halim, a gentle-voiced old man with slow steps who lived alone in a tiny studio with walls covered in old photographs. Early in the morning, as the city woke up, he whispered, "One more day, my lord, it give me strength to walk." The room was simple: a time-worn kettle, a narrow table, and a faded prayer rug folded with extreme care, as if it were a fragment of memory. The neighbor from the second floor, Madame Laurette, always met him on the stairs. "Monsieur Youssef, are you walking to the square again?" He smiled kindly. "My heart needs that walk, my friend." The routine never changed. He drank a small sip of tea, adjusted his coat and walked through the narrow streets, greeting shopkeepers who already knew him. A baker called out from afar, "It's cold today, sir. Are you sure you want to go all the way down there?" Youssef replied with quiet humor, "The cold passes. The prayer doesn't." The path to Place de la République was almost a personal pilgrimage. He walked slowly, leaning on his cane, observing the hurried people around him. Sometimes he sighed, feeling the weight of age, but never hesitated. The open space of the square gave him a sense of freedom, as if that stretch of stone was the only place in the city where his soul could rest. This morning, however, something felt different. A waiter commented as he crossed the street, "Are you all right, sir? You look worried." Youssef lowered his gaze, thoughtful. "I just sense a strange day. Nothing more." He kept walking, clutching the mat against his chest. Every step was slow, firm, almost stubborn, and although he carried a lifetime of losses, he never allowed sorrow to crush his devotion. When he finally reached the square, he took a deep breath, adjusted his coat, and whispered to himself, "Here is enough." What he didn't know was that the path he had walked for years was about to change forever, and that the calm he carried within him would be tested before all of Paris. The peaceful walk that had started in Belleville ended when Youssef reached the wide opening of Place de la République. The transition from narrow streets to the vast open space made the light seem even brighter. The sun that morning illuminated everything with an almost exaggerated shine, reflecting on the cobblestones and old facades. The change was so abrupt that the old man blinked several times, trying to adjust his eyes to the glare. The square was crowded. Cyclists crossed from one side to the other. Tourists gathered near the central monument. Street vendors handed out flyers. Children ran in circles. The constant movement created a chaotic blend of laughter, conversations in multiple languages, and the distant sound of an accordion near the metro exit. Even with all the noise, there was a strange stiffness in the air, as if something was about to break. Youssef chose a quiet corner, as he always did. He adjusted his coat, opened the mat carefully, and leaned forward to check if it was aligned. A woman walking with her son slowed down, watching the gesture. The boy pointed curiously. "Mom, is he going to pray?" She answered in a whisper, "Yes, my love. It's his way of talking to God." Her words were simple, but a few steps ahead, someone reacted differently. Two young men sitting on the edge of the fountain exchanged quick glances. One murmured with irony, "Great, the spiritual session in the middle of the square has begun." The other laughed quietly. Paris turned into a mosque today. The laughs were short, almost timid, but they cut through the air like small sparks. Meanwhile, Youssef noticed nothing. He calmly adjusted his posture, took a deep breath, touched his chest, and murmured a few words in Arabic before beginning his prayer. His expression held the serenity of someone who had done this for decades, someone who found in that moment a refuge the rest of the city couldn't offer. But the unease around him grew. A German tourist frowned and commented to his wife, "Shouldn't he choose another place?" She countered, "He's not bothering anyone." He shrugged but kept staring at the old man, as if something about that scene unsettled him. A man in a suit hurried across the square, speaking on the phone. When he noticed Youssef kneeling, he slowed down, rolled his eyes and muttered, "Always right in front of everyone." No one replied, but the remark triggered a subtle, almost invisible tension, as if a shadow had briefly crossed the sunny square. The wind shifted too. A cold gust swept through, pushing dry leaves toward the mat. A young woman filming the monument whispered to her friend, "Weird, it suddenly got cold." Her friend crossed her arms. "I don't like this kind of sudden quiet." Because in fact the noise dropped. Not entirely, but as if someone had lowered the city's volume for a few seconds. Youssef leaned forward into the first prostration. The square surrounded him with stares, some neutral, others impatient, a few compassionate. Then a harsh voice, dripping with contempt, shattered the air like a crack. "Seriously? Right in the middle of the square?" That comment, thrown like poison, was the exact moment the tension stopped being a feeling and became the start of a storm. From that point on, nothing would be the same. The harsh voice that had risen from a distance soon gained shape when a man with heavy steps crossed the square, pushing people aside to make way. He wore a dark coat, carried a bitter expression, and walked with the urgency of someone who had anger without a target. When he saw Youssef still kneeling, he slowed down, narrowed his eyes, and let out an impatient sigh, as if that simple scene had struck something he already carried inside. "Get up," he growled, approaching without hesitation. "There's plenty of room to pray at home." The sentence made several heads turn. A couple exchanged uneasy glances. A Canadian tourist grabbed her husband's arm and whispered, "He's about to start trouble." Her husband simply raised his phone, instinctively beginning to record. Youssef slowly lifted his face, keeping his natural calm. His hands rested on the mat, and his breathing was steady as if nothing had been broken. He replied in a low voice, "Sir, I'm almost finished. I just need a few moments." The man took a step forward, laughing with contempt. "A few moments? You're bothering everyone. Get out of here now." A young Frenchwoman who had been watching from a distance said to her friend, "He's not blocking anything. Why so much anger?" Her friend pressed her lips together, phone already in hand. "Because some people can't stand seeing peace where they carry a storm." Without waiting for an answer, the aggressor leaned down and gave the mat a harsh shove. The fabric slid across the ground, folding one of the corners and completely throwing off Youssef's position. The impact made some people let out muffled gasps. A child near the fountain grabbed his mother and asked, "Can't he pray there?" The woman answered with restrained seriousness, "Everyone can, my love. Some people just forget that." While several tourists raised their phones to record what was happening, the man moved forward again. "Get up. I'm not going to say it again." Youssef adjusted his body slowly, without aggression, only to regain his balance. There was no anger in his voice, only quiet firmness. "Humanity isn't lost when we see someone praying. If it bothers you, I apologize. I don't want conflict." That unexpectedly gentle tone made the aggressor hesitate for a second, but his pride pushed him back into hostility. He took another step and stretched out his foot to shove the fabric on the ground again. With each movement, more cameras were raised, more witnesses whispered, more people drew closer, forming a silent half-circle. An older man walking by with a shopping bag let out a heavy sigh. This won't end well. And indeed, something in the way the aggressor moved made it clear this wasn't just a moment of irritation. It was a blind impulse, fueled by something that had nothing to do with Youssef. The elderly man, still seated, scooted back a few inches just to avoid being hit by the shoe. Then he placed one hand over his chest and said, in an almost fatherly tone, "May peace reach your heart, son. I wish you no harm." The contrast between the old man's gentleness and the other man's brutality made the crowd hold its breath. Someone whispered, "How can he speak like that after being humiliated?" Another replied, "Maybe that's what true faith does." The aggressor opened his mouth to shout something but didn't manage to finish. Something around them started to change. Not dramatically yet, but enough for people to feel it. And that feeling was the sign that the incident was about to cross any human limit. The man still had his mouth open, ready to hurl another insult, when a strange wind swept across the square, cutting through the air with a chill so sharp that many people hunched their shoulders. It wasn't an ordinary breeze. It came in uneven gusts, as if it were pushing the space in different directions. Napkins from nearby cafes flew, hair was whipped around, and a woman grabbed her hat before it was ripped off her head. Youssef, seated in front of the crumpled mat, slowly lifted his eyes, sensing the impact of the change. His coat fluttered as if it were about to be pulled away, but his body stayed still, anchored in a serenity that clashed with the growing discomfort around him. At the top of the monument, the pigeons that usually walked about without a care suddenly jumped and took off, beating their wings in a disordered frenzy. The sound echoed like hundreds of tiny snaps in the air. An Italian tourist murmured to his wife, "They never fly like that. It's like something scared them all at once." She tightened her grip on her bag strap, uneasy. "But there's nothing to be scared of. Look around." The sky, which just minutes before had been clear, began to lose brightness abruptly. The light didn't vanish like in a typical storm. It dimmed in intensity, as if the sun were being covered by an invisible veil. The shape of the shadows changed. Colors grew dull, and the usual brightness of a late Paris morning was replaced by a grayish tone that made no sense for that time of day. A group of teenagers who had been filming the argument stopped laughing. The boy holding the phone widened his eyes. "Look at this. The camera can't adjust the light anymore." His friends leaned in, watching the screen's brightness flicker. "Looks like an eclipse," another said, startled, except the sky was clear. The whole square filled with short murmurs. People gazed upward, trying to make sense of the sudden dimness. A cyclist swerved quickly around a pedestrian and snapped, "What the heck? Is it going to rain?" The pedestrian answered, confused, "There aren't enough clouds for that." The sound came right after. A muffled, deep noise that seemed to vibrate more inside the chest than in the ears. It wasn't thunder, nor construction. It was something uneven, as if the sky were pushing the air downward in slow waves. A grey-bearded man pointed upward, his breath caught. "Did you hear that? The sound came from up there, but there's no storm." Youssef touched his chest with his fingertips, drawing in a deeper breath. His face didn't show fear, only a quiet recognition, as if that shift around him weren't strange at all, but rather an answer he understood without words. Everyone else, however, felt something entirely different. Restlessness, discomfort, a sense that the space around them was shrinking around the moment they were witnessing. Phones kept recording everything. Some devices began to show slight trembling in the footage, capturing tiny distortions in the light that looked like invisible sparks. A French influencer, who was live streaming at that very moment, brought her hand to her mouth when she noticed the sudden drop in brightness on her broadcast. "Guys, this isn't normal. The camera doesn't do this, not even at night." A dog started barking at nothing, staring fixedly at a point above the square. The leash tightened, the owner lost control for a second, and the animal tried to hide behind a low wall. A group of Japanese tourists huddled together, looking around as if searching for someone to explain that strange collective reaction. In the middle of it all, the aggressor took a step back, not out of remorse, but pure instinct. What's happening here?" he muttered, his voice lower now, tinged with hesitation. No one answered, because in that moment, even those who had never believed in signs felt that something was being announced by nature itself, and the entire square understood that the clash between an angry man and a quiet worshipper had awakened more than human emotions. There was in the air the impression that Paris was about to witness the impossible. The unease taking over Place de la République quickly turned into movement. People started walking back and forth without really knowing what they were looking for. The muffled sound coming from the sky, the sudden shift in light, and the pigeon's flight left everyone with the feeling that a crucial piece was missing to understand what they were witnessing. A red-haired woman who had filmed the beginning of the conflict pressed her phone against her chest and said to her husband, "Something's wrong. I'm going to re-watch the video from the beginning." She crouched behind a bench, searching for shade so she could see the screen more clearly. As she scrubbed the recording forward and backward, she frowned. "Look at this. The light changes at the exact second that man touches the mat." Her husband moved closer, leaning in for a better view. "Do you think it's a camera glitch?" She shook her head, certain. "All the recordings here got strange at the same time. It can't be a coincidence." Not far away, a meteorology student, easily identified by the badge hanging from his backpack, lifted his face toward the darkened sky. He pulled out his phone, opened a weather app, and commented to whoever might be listening. "This doesn't make sense. There are no records of dense clouds in the region this morning." An older woman quickly replied, "Then how do you explain this shadow?" He slid his fingers across the screen, comparing times and indexes. No forecast of rain, no low-pressure alert. Nothing indicated a sudden shift right now. His gaze got stuck on the screen. It was the first time even the specialist himself admitted he didn't know what he was looking at. Meanwhile, Youssef remained seated, adjusting his posture carefully. The sudden change in weather hadn't altered his expression. His left hand slid over his chest, and his lips moved softly. Those close enough could hear, "Hasbi Allahu wa ni'mal wakil." A Muslim woman watching from afar brought her hand to her tears. "He's seeking protection," she whispered. An elderly man beside her, holding a closed umbrella, added, "That supplication is not said for nothing. He knows something greater is happening." The aggressor didn't know where to look. People around them began forming small groups, exchanging theories, comparing videos, trying to understand why the atmosphere had shifted so quickly. Some approached Youssef, not to touch him, but to observe his reaction, as if they expected the old man to hold the key to deciphering the moment. A teenage girl, gripping her phone tightly, warned her friends, "Look at this. My recording shows the shadow descending before the wind even starts." Her friends crowded around the screen, startled. "It's like the day got switched off," one said. Another added, "But only in this area, over there at the end of the square, it's still bright." This detail caught the attention of a physics teacher passing by with a group of students. She analyzed the scene around them and said, "Do you notice the drop in brightness only happened within a very small radius? That doesn't occur in normal natural phenomena." One of the students, frightened, replied, "Then what would it be?" She took a deep breath before admitting, "I don't know." Some people started recording not just the conflict, but the sky, the ground, the buildings, trying to find any clue. A man with a thick beard climbed onto a small sculpture to get a better angle and commented, "There's a clear edge right there, like someone drew a circle around this square." A Spanish tourist photographing the scene looked up at the sky and murmured, "How frightening. This has never happened in any of my trips." At the center of all the agitation, Youssef remained composed. He lifted the mat slowly to realign it, but his eyes stayed serene. People watched him as if searching in his expression for the explanation they lacked. An Arab man stepped closer and asked in a near-reverent whisper, "You felt it before the rest of us, didn't you?" Youssef slowly raised his eyes and answered with humility, "When someone is humiliated while seeking the Creator, creation itself feels it." The phrase spread among the witnesses like a powerful murmur. It wasn't a full answer, just enough to intensify the mystery. Another woman holding the recording that showed the descending shadow asked, "What do you think is going to happen now?" Youssef didn't answer. His silence created a new tension, heavier than before. Each group tried to build its own conclusion, but nothing fit. The entire square was suspended, as if everyone were waiting for the next step of an event that defied explanation. And in the midst of that tense atmosphere, one quiet certainty grew. This wasn't just a dispute between two men. There were greater forces at play, and Paris was beginning to realize the unexplainable had only just begun. While the groups continued debating without reaching any conclusion, a distinct sound cut through the square's murmur, the whistle of the municipal worker responsible for patrolling the area. Wearing the fluorescent yellow vest, he walked to the center of the commotion with short, firm steps. He looked around, assessing the darkened scene that contrasted with the forecast of full sun, and then fixed his gaze on the aggressor, who stood uneasy beside the crowd. "What happened here?" he asked, approaching a woman holding her phone with the recording still open. The Canadian tourist extended her device to him. This man interrupted the elderly man's prayer. He pushed the mat, and right after that, all this started. The worker watched a few seconds of the video, frowned and called another colleague over the radio. "Confirm for me the name of the elderly man who prays here in the mornings, the one who's always registered in the square." The colleague responded quickly, static crackling through the speaker. "If you're talking about the gentleman from Belleville, he's authorized. Documentation signed by City Hall 3 months ago. Area approved for prayer, as long as it doesn't block circulation. He follows everything properly." Hearing that, several people exchanged surprised looks. A French woman commented to the group beside her, "So he had official permission all this time?" The young man next to her replied, stunned, so the problem wasn't him. The aggressor, hearing those words echoing around him, took a timid step back. "Permission? What do you mean, permission?" The municipal worker turned to him. "You interfered with an activity authorized by the city. That's an infraction." The word infraction hit hard. Tourists drew even closer, phones raised, waiting to see what would unfold. But the real revelation came from another side of the square. A student who had been following the case from the beginning ran toward the center, waving his phone. "I compared the timestamps. Look at this." People made space for him to catch his breath. The darkening doesn't match any forecast or atmospheric data. There's no record of sudden light loss at this time anywhere in the city. The change happened only here, around the monument within a specific radius. A woman clutched her coat against her chest. "Are you saying only this square went dark?" The student nodded. "Yes, everywhere else is still bright. I've already gotten photos from friends in nearby streets. Nothing changed there." Before the group could react, another detail amplified the collective shock. A Spanish tourist brought a recording he had filmed from afar, even before noticing the conflict. He played it on a larger screen, a tablet. Look, watch the exact moment. The image showed Youssef adjusting the mat, preparing to pray. Everything was bright, but when the aggressor approached and lifted his foot to shove the fabric, the light flickered as if an invisible layer had descended over the scene. The instant the kick made contact, the recording darkened abruptly, almost instantly. There was no natural transition. It was as if someone had switched off half the morning with a single click. "This isn't normal," the physics teacher murmured, stepping closer to examine each frame. She adjusted her glasses and analyzed it with precision. "This drop in light doesn't match shadow, doesn't match clouds, doesn't match any known optical pattern." The municipal worker, still holding the radio, added, "And I'll confirm again. He is within the law. We have his name registered, his usual schedule, everything filed." Youssef, hearing that statement, bowed his head briefly as if thanking in silence. There was no pride, only calm. His serene posture contrasted with the collective unrest. The aggressor, on the other hand, was sweating. "This is image manipulation, it's a trick," a young woman immediately replied. "Then explain why my own eyes saw the same thing without any screen." Another added, "And why only this square is under that shadow." Still, the most impactful moment came from a Korean visitor who had filmed the scene from afar, unaware that he had captured something revealing. He zoomed in and showed the video on the enlarged screen of his laptop. The image showed Youssef unmoving, while the light around him dimmed. But for less than a second, a faint glow appeared around the mat, almost imperceptible, yet unmistakably there. The teacher covered her mouth with her hand. That shouldn't exist." People looked at one another. The air felt heavy with meaning, as if truth itself were suspended in front of them. The municipal worker took a deep breath, handed back the tourist's tablet and declared, "None of these phenomena can be explained by the rules I follow, but one thing is certain. The old man did nothing wrong." And with that sentence, the square understood that what had seemed like an ordinary dispute had just revealed itself to be something much larger. The municipal worker's last words were still echoing when the attitude of the crowd changed completely. There were no more doubts about who had started the conflict. With videos, witnesses, and official confirmations, the weight of responsibility fell on the aggressor like an unexpected shadow. Slowly, men, women, and tourists formed a tighter circle, not violent but silently demanding. A grey-haired woman pointed a finger at the man and said firmly, "You humiliated someone who only wanted to pray." A young man beside her added, "And you did it for no reason. Now you want to deny it." The aggressor swallowed hard, trying to maintain an authoritative posture. I just asked him to leave. No need for all this drama." But his voice betrayed his insecurity. That aggressive confidence had vanished. His eyes scanned the crowd, searching for support that no longer existed. A German tourist stepped forward. "That's not what we saw. You started pushing before you even opened your mouth." Then another voice from the back. "He was authorized, you weren't." The man stepped back. His breathing quickened, and the color drained from his face. The atmosphere wasn't one of revenge. It was truth exposed. The feeling of being judged by an entire square made his hands shake. He tried to respond, but no words came. Youssef, meanwhile, remained seated in the same place. Now the mat had been laid out again, adjusted by a young man who had wanted to help him quietly. The elderly man observed the scene around him with tired yet peaceful eyes. There was no anger in his expression, no pride, only compassion. The tension rose when a woman approached the man and asked in a firm tone, "Are you going to apologize or keep pretending?" The aggressor looked away, unable to face the crowd. That collective weight seemed to crush him more than any physical punishment could. I don't know what to say," he murmured. Youssef placed one hand on the ground to stand up. A young man rushed to help him, but he declined with a gentle gesture. Once on his feet, he adjusted his coat and slowly approached the man who had humiliated him minutes earlier. Many held their breath, expecting irritation, reprimand, perhaps even a harsh sentence. But the old man simply placed his hand over his chest, bowed his head and said in a voice low enough that only the nearest circle could hear, "Hasbunallahu wa ni'mal wakil." The murmur spread like a soft wave. Some recognized the supplication. Others only felt the spiritual weight of those words. A young woman whispered, "He's placing the situation in God's hands." A man nodded. "That's stronger than any shout." The aggressor lifted his face and saw Youssef so close that he almost stepped back again. The old man showed no expression of victory, only the look of someone who recognizes another's pain before his own. "Son," Youssef said, "the anger you carried wasn't against me." The man blinked, confused. "I don't understand." "You do," the elder replied softly. "But you're not ready to admit it yet." The entire square fell completely silent. Even the musician with the accordion stopped playing. The pigeons, once agitated, now stood still on the rooftops. The light remained thick and unnatural, as if the whole city were witnessing the moment with full attention. A child tugged her mother's arm and whispered, "Mom, did he forgive him?" The mother took a shaky breath, moved. "I don't know if yet, but he's showing how forgiveness begins." The aggressor, pressured by everyone's presence, closed his eyes and drew a deep breath as if trying to organize tangled thoughts. His throat seemed locked. "I didn't mean to—" But the sentence died in the air, maybe because he himself knew it wasn't true. Youssef took a small step back, giving the man space to speak if he wished, but he demanded nothing. That lack of pressure created even more tension. The crowd waited for a final response. Everyone wanted to know whether the aggressor would apologize, or whether his pride would stop him from finding even his own relief. And just when the silence seemed ready to explode, a gust of wind swept across the square again, stronger than before. Flyers shot upward, bags shifted, hair whipped, as if the air itself announced that something inevitable was about to happen. It was the prelude, the final moment of calm before the climax that would mark Paris forever. The silence that followed Youssef's supplication didn't last long. A gust of air cut across the square like a cold blade, making bags shake, hair whip, and tourists step back. No one understood why the temperature had dropped so sharply in the middle of late morning. The aggressor, standing before the old man, took a deep breath, trying to keep his composure, but his fingers betrayed him by trembling uncontrollably. Suddenly the sky changed. The light blue above Place de la République darkened as if someone had pulled an invisible curtain across it. These weren't normal clouds. It was a compact, dense shadow that advanced so abruptly that everyone lifted their heads at the same time. A child pointed upward and asked her mother, "Why did the sun turn off?" The woman didn't answer. She just pulled her son close. And then the flash came. A solitary lightning bolt tore across the sky without warning, shining with such intensity that its reflections scattered across the windows of nearby cafes and storefronts. No meteorologist could have predicted it. Not a single drop of rain fell. It was only light, fast, direct, impossible to ignore. The sound followed right after, deep and booming, echoing through the surrounding buildings like a giant drum. Tourists screamed, some ducked down, others froze in place. Several phones kept recording automatically, capturing the thunder's vibration in the microphone, like a roar coming from somewhere that didn't feel earthly. The attacker couldn't withstand the impact. His legs gave out. He fell back onto the ground, gasping, his eyes wide and his hands clenched around his knees. The color drained from his face. He looked stripped of life. The arrogant attitude he had displayed minutes earlier evaporated the moment the sound tore across the square. A young man filming the scene exclaimed, almost voiceless, "This isn't normal," so the sky was clear. Near the fountain, a tourist repeated to her husband, "Lightning with no clouds? Does that even exist?" He just shook his head, trying to understand what he was witnessing. Youssef, however, remained still. His expression showed no surprise, only reverence. He seemed to know that this wasn't merely a weather event, but a response. His lips moved quietly, though no one could hear what he said. Around him, dozens of recordings captured the same sequence: the kick, the insult, the darkening, the flash, the attacker collapsing. It was impossible to deny the order of events. The moment would become evidence, debate, headline. And while the square remained in shock, everyone waited, barely daring to breathe, to see what would happen after that impossible sign. The thunder had already faded when the square finally began to react. First came the murmurs, then cautious steps approaching Youssef. A group of Spanish tourists stood beside him, forming a sort of spontaneous shield. A woman placed her hand on the elder's shoulder and said, her voice trembling, "Monsieur, no one should treat you like that." The attacker, still sitting on the ground, breathed irregularly. He lifted his eyes, saw the serene face of the man he had humiliated minutes earlier, and, unable to support his own weight, stretched out a trembling hand. "I was wrong. I don't know what came over me." There was no arrogance left in his tone, only fear and regret. A French boy who had filmed the entire scene stepped in and helped the man back to his feet. The gesture surprised those watching, but he quickly explained, No one improves by being pushed down again. Let's solve this the right way. The sound of sirens began echoing down the street. It wasn't a weather emergency. It was the press arriving. Reporters pushed through the crowd with their microphones raised, asking what had happened, who the old man was, why the sky had darkened like that. No one could give a solid explanation. They all repeated the same thing. It happened too fast. Meanwhile, two technicians from a news station reviewed footage recorded by their own team. One of them zoomed in, frowned, and called his colleague. "Look at this, right here." In the frame, at the exact instant of the flash, the mat in front of Youssef remained completely still, while bags, papers, and even hats were being pushed by the sudden wind. The area around him seemed protected by something invisible. The discovery spread within seconds. People began pointing, discussing, reviewing their own videos, and at the center of that new swirl of whispers, Youssef stood silently, not seeking attention, while everyone understood that something far greater was at play. In the days that followed, Place de la République never functioned the same way again. Shopkeepers who had barely noticed the old man before began arranging a small space near the fountain, moving benches aside and leaving an open area so he could lay down his prayer mat without being disturbed. It was a spontaneous, almost unanimous gesture, as if everyone had understood, without needing to talk about it, that there was a boundary there worthy of respect. One morning, an Algerian woman appeared carrying a folding chair. "For when your legs get tired, mon ami." He thanked her with a timid smile, placing the seat beside the spot where he usually prayed. Soon after, cafe owners began bringing him cups of hot tea whenever they saw him approaching. Young people who used to rush past now slowed down to greet him. Even cyclists stopped for a few seconds, removing their headphones during his prayer as a silent sign of respect. Regulars of the square noticed another change. The atmosphere seemed calmer at prayer time. Pigeons landed near him without fear, and the wind passing through the space moved with a gentler rhythm, almost welcoming. Youssef continued his routine with simplicity, but now surrounded by kind faces. Paris, little by little, transformed the episode into a living memory, reminding everyone that a single act of respect can change the entire atmosphere of a place. Dawn settled over Paris with an unusual softness, as if the city was still absorbing the lesson it had witnessed. Place de la République was waking slowly, and Youssef walked toward his usual spot with the mat folded against his chest. His steps were calm, as though carrying the certainty that dignity is never silence, it is steadiness. When he reached the place where he always prayed, he lifted his gaze to the clear sky. He took a deep breath, closed his eyes for a moment, and let a quiet but meaningful phrase escape. "Nothing dims the truth of a heart that stays in peace." Those nearby heard him and fell still for a few seconds. The sentence seemed to summarize everything that had happened: the strength to remain whole amid disrespect, the unexpected answer from nature, and the quiet shift in the eyes around him. There was no exaggeration, no judgment, only truth. Youssef placed the mat on the ground and began his prayer. The square, almost without noticing, began to slow down. The wind grew lighter, pedestrians' footsteps softened, and even the distant noise of traffic seemed to respect the moment. It wasn't a miracle, it was consequence, it was transformation. When he finished and folded the mat, the sun was already brightening the square, casting a golden tone across the stones. People waved discreetly. Some smiled, others simply watched with reverence. The entire atmosphere felt charged with a silent message. Certain events don't fade because they were born to teach. They are signs that don't frighten, they awaken. Signs that don't punish, they guide. Signs that pass through the soul of anyone who has the courage to listen. And so the final lesson remained. Humble faith illuminates even the most ordinary places. If this story touched you, watch the next video and subscribe to the channel to continue walking with courage, purpose, and an awakened heart.